What if the next global shock does not begin with a declaration of war, the collapse of a bank, or the discovery of a new virus? What if it begins with something that appears manageable, a damaged cable beneath the sea, a port closed for several days, a cyber attack against an electricity grid, a semiconductor factory forced to stop production, a political confrontation that delays a vital shipment? None of these events by itself would bring the modern world to its knees. But the modern world is no longer a collection of separate systems. Its banks, power grids, factories, data centers, shipping routes, governments and military alliances are connected so tightly that a disruption in one can travel rapidly into all the others. The next great crisis may not arrive as a single blow. It may begin as a chain reaction. The World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2026, based on the views of more than 1,300 experts, identified geoeconomic confrontation as the most serious risk over the next 2 years. 18% of respondents also selected it as the risk most likely to trigger a material global crisis in 2026. That finding matters because geoeconomic confrontation is not simply an argument over tariffs. It is the use of trade, finance, technology, investment, energy, and strategic resources as instruments of national power. And once economic systems become weapons, almost every connection in the global economy becomes a potential battlefield. This is the central danger of the 21st century. Humanity continues preparing for crises as though they will arrive one at a time. Governments maintain separate departments for defense, energy, public health, finance, transportation, and cybersecurity. Each ministry studies its own danger. Each regulator protects its own institution. Each alliance prepares for its own category of threat. But the threats themselves no longer respect these divisions. A war can become an energy crisis. An energy crisis can become an inflation crisis. Inflation can force interest rates higher. Higher rates can expose unsustainable debt. Debt pressure can force governments to reduce investment. Reduced investment can weaken infrastructure. Weak infrastructure can magnify the damage caused by cyber attacks, extreme weather, or military conflict. The crisis changes its name as it moves through the system. Yet it remains the same crisis. The world has spent decades building extraordinary efficiency. Goods can cross continents in days. Money can move in milliseconds. Factories can coordinate production across dozens of countries. Digital platforms can connect billions of people. A company in Europe can design a product using American software, manufacture it with Asian semiconductors, assemble it in Mexico, insure it in London, and sell it everywhere. This system created immense prosperity. It also created dependence on countless invisible connections. A modern automobile may contain tens of thousands of components supplied by companies scattered across the world. A hospital depends not only on doctors and medicine, but on electricity, software, refrigeration, telecommunications, transportation, sterile packaging, and international pharmaceutical supply chains. A supermarket depends on farms, fertilizer, fuel, credit, refrigeration, warehouses, trucking networks, payment systems, and functioning roads. A data center depends on electricity, advanced chips, cooling equipment, water, maintenance personnel, fiber optic cables, and a continuous supply of replacement hardware. Remove one connection, and the system may continue. Remove several at once, and efficiency can turn into fragility. This is the paradox of modern progress. The world has become stronger in almost every individual capability, yet more vulnerable to failures that spread between capabilities. The clearest warning came from COVID-19. The pandemic began as a public health emergency, but it did not remain one. Governments closed borders and restricted movement. Factories suspended production. Ports became congested. Passenger flights disappeared, removing part of the cargo capacity on which international trade depended. Consumers stopped spending on many services and began purchasing more physical goods for their homes. Demand shifted faster than supply chains could respond. Containers accumulated in the wrong places. Shipping costs rose. Manufacturers waited for components. Companies discovered that suppliers several layers beneath their direct partners had become critical points of failure. A factory could remain open, employ thousands of workers, and possess almost everything necessary to continue production, yet still stop because one inexpensive component had not arrived. The semiconductor shortage demonstrated this with brutal clarity. Advanced chips are physically small, but economically enormous. They are required in vehicles, communications equipment, medical technology, weapons systems, industrial machinery, and consumer electronics. Semiconductor manufacturing also depends on highly specialized equipment, chemicals, technical knowledge, and extraordinarily complex production facilities. These capabilities are concentrated in a limited number of countries and companies. When pandemic disruption collided with rapidly changing demand, chip shortages forced manufacturers to delay production or remove features from products. Automobile plants capable of building nearly an entire vehicle sometimes waited for components worth only a fraction of the finished machine. The lesson was not that international trade had failed. The lesson was that global production had been optimized for normal conditions. For years, corporations had been rewarded for reducing inventory, eliminating unused capacity, and lowering costs. Warehouses were treated as inefficiencies. Redundant suppliers appeared unnecessary. Spare production capacity seemed wasteful. The system became leaner. It also lost many of its shock absorbers. Under stable conditions, just in time, production was remarkably efficient. Under crisis conditions, it could become not in time. The disruption then moved again. Supply shortages combined with strong consumer demand and vast fiscal support. Prices rose across transportation, goods, housing, and energy. Labour markets experienced unusual shortages and dislocations. Central banks that had spent years operating in a world of low inflation were forced to tighten monetary policy. Interest rates climbed. That response was necessary to restrain inflation, but it revealed another connection. For more than a decade, governments, corporations, and households had adapted to extremely cheap money. Debt accumulated in a financial environment where borrowing costs appeared permanently low. Then the price of money changed. The IMF reported in 2026 that global public debt had risen to just under 94% of world GDP in 2025 and projected that it could reach 100% by 2029. Total public and private non-financial debt had already remained above 235% of global GDP. These figures do not mean a global financial collapse is inevitable. Debt is not automatically a crisis. Strong economies can sustain significant borrowing, particularly when it finances productive investment. But high debt narrows the room for error. A government paying more interest has less money available for defence, infrastructure, education, pensions, healthcare, or emergency support. If another recession arrives, that government may find it more expensive to respond. If markets begin questioning its finances, the cost of borrowing can rise precisely when additional spending is most urgently needed. This is how a health emergency can eventually become a fiscal problem. And the pandemic was only one disruption. War in Ukraine affected energy markets, grain exports, fertilizer supplies, defense budgets, and refugee movements. Attacks and instability around strategic waterways forced vessels to reconsider routes, adding time and expense to international shipping. Competition between the United States and China placed new restrictions on advanced technologies and increased concern about access to semiconductors and critical minerals. Each event was different, yet each entered the same interconnected machine. Consider global shipping. Most people rarely think about the narrow passages through which world trade must move. But a significant share of commerce passes through a small number of maritime choke points: the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Panama Canal, and several other strategic waterways. These routes are not merely lines on a map. They are part of the circulatory system of the global economy. When a route becomes unsafe or unavailable, A vessel may have to travel thousands of additional miles. That requires more fuel, more crew time, more insurance, and more ships to transport the same amount of cargo. The consequences do not remain at sea. Delayed components affect factories. More expensive fuel affects transportation. Higher insurance costs enter consumer prices. Delivery uncertainty encourages companies to hold more inventory. That requires additional capital and storage. Central banks then have to determine whether the resulting inflation is temporary or whether it is beginning to influence wages and expectations. A disruption in one narrow waterway can therefore reach a household on another continent through the price of food, fuel, or manufactured goods. Energy creates a similar web of dependence. Modern economies require reliable power for everything from hospitals and water systems to communications networks and financial markets. The expansion of artificial intelligence is increasing the strategic importance of electricity even further. AI may appear to exist in an intangible digital realm, but its physical foundations are immense. It requires data centers, powerful processors, transmission infrastructure, cooling systems, and dependable energy. It also depends on minerals, advanced manufacturing, and global networks of technical expertise. The nations that lead in artificial intelligence will therefore need more than talented programmers. They will need chips. They will need power. They will need capital. They will need secure telecommunications. And they will need supply chains capable of supporting all four. This transforms energy security into technological security. It transforms semiconductor production into national security. And it transforms the electricity grid into a strategic asset. A prolonged power failure would no longer mean only dark homes and silent factories. It could interfere with payments, communications, logistics, medical services, and government operations. If caused by a cyberattack, it might also create uncertainty about who was responsible and whether retaliation was justified. The more functions society places online, the more cyber resilience becomes inseparable from economic resilience. Digital systems have made modern civilization faster, more productive, and more convenient. They have also created opportunities for disruption at enormous scale. A successful intrusion does not always require the destruction of physical infrastructure. Attackers may encrypt data, compromise suppliers, interrupt communications, or create enough uncertainty to force an operator to shut down systems as a precaution. And artificial intelligence may increase both defensive and offensive capabilities. It can help identify threats, analyze networks, and automate responses. But it can also lower the cost of producing deceptive messages, discovering software weaknesses, or conducting large numbers of more sophisticated attacks. The BIS warned in its 2026 annual reporting that frontier AI models can reduce the cost and accelerate the pace of cyber attacks. Technology therefore strengthens the fortress while creating new doors into it. Financial systems display the same contradiction. Global capital markets allow investment to flow toward opportunity. They help governments finance infrastructure, companies expand, and households borrow. But financial conditions also travel across borders with remarkable speed. The Bank for International Settlements has found that the international transmission of financial conditions has become stronger and more multi-directional. A change in interest rates, asset prices, or investor confidence in one major economy can influence borrowing costs far beyond its borders. This can be beneficial when confidence is rising. It can be dangerous when everyone attempts to retreat at once. A financial institution does not need to be insolvent to create panic. It may simply be unable to sell assets quickly enough without accepting severe losses. If many institutions hold similar investments or rely on similar funding, their individual efforts to protect themselves can destabilize the entire market. What is rational for one institution can become destructive when everyone does it simultaneously. The same principle applies to nations. One government may restrict exports of a strategic resource to protect domestic consumers. Another may subsidize local industry to reduce dependence on foreign suppliers. A third may impose sanctions for security reasons. Each decision may be understandable on its own. Together, they can fragment trade, duplicate production, raise costs, and deepen mistrust. Resilience then becomes more difficult because cooperation is weakest at the moment it is needed most. Winston Churchill understood warfare not as a contest of armies alone, but as a struggle involving industry, finance, intelligence, shipping, diplomacy, technology, and public morale. Britain could possess brave soldiers and still lose if merchant vessels could not deliver food. It could build aircraft and still fail without fuel. It could receive weapons and still be endangered if its alliances fractured. It could win battles and still lose the larger struggle if public confidence collapsed. No single link guaranteed survival. Every link mattered. A Churchillian reading of the modern world would begin with the same principle. National security cannot be separated from economic strength. Economic strength cannot be separated from energy. Energy cannot be separated from technology. Technology cannot be separated from supply chains. And none of these can remain secure for long if citizens lose confidence in the institutions managing them. This does not mean disaster is certain. Interconnection is not only a weakness, it can also distribute resources, accelerate innovation, and allow nations to support one another during emergencies. The same networks that transmit shocks can transmit solutions. But a system built for speed must also be prepared for interruption. A system built for efficiency must preserve redundancy. And a society that depends on trust must understand how quickly trust can be damaged. The real measure of progress is not simply how well civilization performs when everything works. It is how much of civilization continues working when several things do not. The world is no longer built like a collection of isolated nations. It increasingly behaves like one enormous machine. And machines rarely fail in only one place. Machines rarely fail in only one place. But the greater danger begins when the damage does not remain where it started. Imagine that a military confrontation disrupts a major energy route. Oil and gas prices rise. Shipping insurance becomes more expensive. Freight companies add surcharges. Airlines pay more for fuel. Farmers face higher costs for machinery, transportation and fertilizer. Manufacturers spend more on electricity and raw materials. Businesses begin passing those costs to consumers. Inflation returns. Central banks, fearing that higher prices will become permanent, delay interest rate cuts or raise rates again. Mortgages become more expensive. Companies postpone expansion. Governments pay more to refinance their debt. Then the chain reaches politics. Households already struggling with housing, food and energy bills demand relief. Governments introduce subsidies, tax reductions or price controls. These measures may ease public anger, but they can also increase budget deficits. Bond markets begin asking whether heavily indebted states can continue borrowing at the same pace. The conflict that began at sea is now affecting central banks, pension funds, elections, and public confidence thousands of miles away. Nothing in this sequence is inevitable, but every connection is real. That is what makes cascading crises so difficult to control. The first event may be visible. The consequences travel through systems that most citizens never see. Geopolitical conflict is particularly dangerous because it can damage both the supply of essential goods and the trust required to restore it. In an ordinary shortage, countries can cooperate. Producers increase output. Buyers find substitutes. Governments coordinate emergency supplies. In a strategic confrontation, those solutions become harder. A nation controlling energy, technology, or critical minerals may hesitate to help a rival. Governments may introduce export controls. Companies may be ordered to restrict sales. Investment may be blocked because civilian technology could have military applications. Markets then stop operating only according to price. They begin operating according to power. The semiconductor industry already exists at this intersection. Advanced chips are essential to artificial intelligence, communications, weapons, vehicles, and industrial production. But no major country independently controls every stage of their creation. chip design, manufacturing equipment, specialized software, materials, fabrication and packaging are distributed across a small number of nations and firms. This division of labor has produced extraordinary technological progress. It has also created strategic anxiety. If access to advanced semiconductors becomes restricted, governments may respond by subsidizing domestic production. Rival states may accelerate their own programs. Companies may duplicate facilities to satisfy national security requirements. The result may be a more resilient system in the long term. During the transition, however, it can also mean higher costs, competing technical standards, and greater pressure on government budgets. A similar problem exists with critical minerals. Modern economies need copper for electricity networks, lithium and graphite for batteries, and rare earth elements for technologies ranging from motors and electronics to aerospace and defense systems. These materials may be extracted in one country, processed in another, and incorporated into finished equipment somewhere else. The International Energy Agency reported that, by 2024, the three largest refining nations controlled an average of 86% of refined supply for key energy minerals, up from approximately 82% in 2020. The IEA also found that China was the leading refiner for 19 of 20 important strategic minerals, with an average share of roughly 70%. This does not mean those supplies will necessarily be cut off. It means the possibility of disruption has become a strategic consideration. If export restrictions are introduced, manufacturers may scramble for alternatives. Prices may rise. Energy projects may be delayed. Governments may offer subsidies for new mines and processing facilities. But mines can take years to develop. Environmental reviews, local opposition, infrastructure requirements, and technical challenges cannot be resolved by political speeches. A supply chain built over decades cannot always be reconstructed before the next election. This creates a dangerous mismatch. Geopolitical decisions can be made in days. Industrial resilience may require years. The energy transition adds another layer to this competition. Countries are attempting to reduce emissions, improve energy security, and electrify transportation, while simultaneously meeting rising demand from industry and data centers. These objectives are not necessarily contradictory. Renewable energy, nuclear power, storage, and stronger grids can reduce dependence on imported fuels. But the transition itself requires large quantities of capital, minerals, equipment, and electricity infrastructure. If mineral supplies tighten, clean energy equipment may become more expensive. If power grids are not expanded quickly enough, electrification can outpace the system supporting it. If energy prices rise during the transition, public support can weaken. And if governments reverse policy every time political leadership changes, companies may delay investment because they cannot predict the rules under which their projects will operate. What begins as an engineering challenge can become an economic dispute, and then an electoral one. This is how crises feed one another, not through a secret plan, through incentives, delays, and decisions that may appear rational when viewed separately. Artificial intelligence could intensify this process. AI may raise productivity, accelerate scientific discovery, and help economies compensate for aging workforces. It could improve medical diagnosis, optimize energy use, and allow companies to perform complex tasks more efficiently. But technological gains are rarely distributed evenly or immediately. Some occupations may become more productive, others may lose tasks, bargaining power, or demand. New industries may emerge, but not necessarily in the same communities where old jobs disappear. The IMF reported in 2026 that 1 in 10 online job vacancies in advanced economies already required at least one new skill. In emerging market economies, the figure was approximately 1 in 20. That suggests the transformation is not merely approaching, it has begun. The critical question is not whether AI will take all the jobs. That claim is far too simple. The real question is whether workers, schools, companies, and governments can adapt at the same speed as the technology. A worker may be capable of learning new skills but unable to leave a job to attend training. A region may lose traditional employment before new investment arrives. A company may automate tasks without creating a path for employees to move into new roles. Productivity may increase nationally while insecurity increases locally. If the gains from AI are concentrated among highly skilled workers, major technology firms, and the owners of capital, inequality could widen even while the economy grows. That can produce political consequences. Citizens who believe the system is advancing without them may become less willing to trust experts, institutions, or technological change. They may support abrupt restrictions or economic policies that promise protection but reduce investment. The technological transition then becomes a political crisis. The political crisis slows the technological transition. Meanwhile, AI is transforming information itself. Generative systems can produce convincing text, images, audio, and video at extraordinary speed. These tools can educate, translate, and expand access to knowledge. They can also make deception cheaper. False information no longer needs to be written by large organizations. It can be generated, adapted, and distributed automatically to different audiences. Fraudulent messages can be personalized. Fabricated recordings may imitate public figures. Networks of accounts can create the appearance of widespread public agreement. The World Economic Forum ranked misinformation and disinformation as the second most severe global risk over the 2 years to 2028. Societal polarization ranked third. The relationship between the two matters more than either ranking alone. Misinformation becomes more effective in a polarized society because citizens are already prepared to believe the worst about one another. Polarization becomes more severe when misinformation supplies each group with a separate version of reality. During an election, this can weaken confidence in the process itself. During war, it can confuse citizens about what's happening. During a public health emergency, it can obstruct coordinated action. And during a financial panic, a false rumor can travel faster than any regulator can issue a correction. A bank run once required crowds outside a building. In a digital economy, money can move from a phone. Confidence can disappear in minutes. The same technology that makes finance convenient can accelerate panic. The same social platforms that distribute official warnings can distribute fabricated ones. The same AI systems used to defend networks may help attackers search for weaknesses. Cybersecurity, therefore, cannot be separated from political stability or financial stability. Consider a cyberattack against a large hospital network. Appointments are disrupted. Medical records become inaccessible. Ambulances are redirected. Staff return to paper systems. The attack becomes a healthcare emergency. If several hospitals are affected, public authorities must intervene. If patient data is stolen, confidence in digital services declines. If the attackers are believed to have foreign support, the incident becomes a diplomatic and national security crisis. If attribution remains uncertain, leaders face an even harder decision: respond too weakly and invite further attacks, or respond too aggressively and risk escalating a conflict based on incomplete evidence. The vulnerability is not simply in the computer code. It lies in the political consequences of uncertainty. The WEF placed cyber insecurity sixth among risks over the 2-year horizon in its 2026 report. The Bank for International Settlements has also warned that frontier AI may lower the cost and accelerate the pace of cyber attacks. Governments must therefore defend more infrastructure against faster attacks while also financing pensions, healthcare, defense, energy systems, and debt interest. This is where demography enters the crisis chain. Many developed economies are aging. People are living longer while birth rates in numerous countries remain below the level required to replace the population. The proportion of retirees grows while the proportion of workers financing public services expands more slowly or begins to shrink. An aging society is not a failing society. Longer life expectancy is one of humanity's greatest achievements. But pension and healthcare systems designed for a younger population face increasing pressure when fewer workers support more retirees for longer periods. Governments then confront difficult choices. They can raise taxes, increase the retirement age, reduce future benefits, encourage immigration, borrow more money, or attempt some combination of all five. Every choice creates political resistance. Higher taxes may discourage investment or burden younger workers. A higher retirement age may be reasonable for some occupations, but punishing for people in physically demanding work. Lower benefits can threaten those with little private savings. More borrowing shifts costs into the future. Immigration can expand the workforce and relieve labour shortages, but rapid migration also requires housing, schools, healthcare, and successful integration. If governments fail to provide them, legitimate logistical challenges can be transformed into social anger. Misinformation can then intensify the dispute. Economic pressure becomes cultural conflict. Cultural conflict weakens political cooperation. Weak political cooperation makes pension and migration reform even harder. Delay becomes its own decision. The longer reform is postponed, the more painful it may eventually become. Now add defense. SIPRI estimated that world military expenditure reached approximately $887 trillion in 2025, the highest level it had recorded and the 11th consecutive annual increase. Global military spending had risen by 41% over the preceding decade. Much of this expenditure reflects genuine security threats. Countries cannot simply ignore war, coercion, or the vulnerability of their allies. But every government operates within limits. Money committed to weapons, ammunition, and military readiness cannot simultaneously finance every bridge, pension, school, power grid, and cybersecurity program. The true strategic question is therefore not whether defense spending is good or bad. It is whether a nation can build military strength without allowing the economic and social foundations beneath that strength to erode. A country may purchase advanced aircraft while its electrical grid remains vulnerable. It may expand its army while depending on a geopolitical rival for key industrial materials. It may promise generous pensions while borrowing at rising interest rates. It may subsidize semiconductor factories while lacking enough skilled workers or reliable energy to operate them. Every objective can be defensible. Together, they may exceed the state's financial and administrative capacity. This is the point at which debt becomes more than an accounting figure. High debt does not necessarily cause a crisis, but it limits choices when several emergencies arrive together. Imagine a government facing an energy shock, military pressure, and a recession at the same time. It may need to protect vulnerable households, support businesses, increase defense production, and stabilize the financial system. If borrowing costs are already high, every response becomes more expensive. Investors may demand a higher return. The currency may weaken. Imported goods become more costly, adding to inflation. The central bank then faces an impossible-looking choice: raise interest rates to defend price stability and risk deepening the recession, or reduce rates to support the economy and risk further inflation or currency weakness. There may be no painless answer because the problems were not created by one part of the system. Churchill confronted a different world, but he understood this kind of strategic pressure. Strategy was not the art of responding dramatically to each new emergency. It was the discipline of understanding which emergency would create the next one. A battlefield defeat could affect an alliance. An alliance under strain could endanger a supply route. A lost supply route could weaken industry. Weakened industry could determine the outcome of battles not yet fought. The decisive connection was often invisible until it was too late to protect it. The same principle applies now. A government that treats energy, debt, technology, migration, pensions, cybersecurity and defense as independent questions may solve each problem on paper while weakening the system as a whole. A subsidy may reduce today's anger but increase tomorrow's debt. An export restriction may protect one industry while damaging another. Rapid automation may raise productivity while destabilizing communities that received none of its benefits. Higher military spending may improve deterrence while leaving civilian infrastructure exposed. And political leaders focused entirely on the next election may postpone reforms that become impossible during the next emergency. This is not an argument for paralysis. It is an argument for strategy. The world does not lack warnings. It lacks institutions designed to connect them. The greatest danger is not that leaders will make no decisions. It is that they will make thousands of separate decisions without understanding the system those decisions create. Because in an age of cascading crises, the emergency that dominates tomorrow's headlines may already be forming inside the solution chosen today. The world does not lack warnings. It lacks institutions designed to connect them. That is why resilience must become more than a word used after disaster. It must become a principle of government before disaster arrives. Resilience does not mean predicting the exact date, location, or form of the next crisis. No government can know which cyber attack will succeed, where the next conflict will escalate, which bank will come under pressure, or which supply route will be interrupted. It means building a society capable of continuing when those predictions are wrong. A resilient country does not avoid every shock. It absorbs the first blow without allowing that blow to destroy the systems needed for recovery. This distinction is crucial. Preparation for one specific emergency can fail when the emergency takes a different form. A strategic fuel reserve may help during an energy shortage, but do little during a cyber attack. A strong military may deter invasion, but cannot replace an electrical grid. Large financial reserves may support an economy, but money alone cannot manufacture missing semiconductors or restore public trust. Resilience must therefore exist across the entire system. NATO defines civil preparedness through three core functions: the continuity of government, the continuity of essential services, and the ability of civilian systems to support military operations. Its framework identifies 7 basic areas of national resilience: government, energy, population movements, food and water, mass casualties, communications and transportation. The military significance is obvious. An army cannot operate for long if civilian railways stop moving equipment, telecommunications fail, hospitals become overwhelmed, or electricity disappears. But the same framework applies far beyond war. A country capable of maintaining power, communications, healthcare, transportation, and legitimate government during conflict is also better equipped to withstand a pandemic, natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial emergency. The foundations are largely the same. The first is energy. A resilient energy system does not depend completely on one fuel, one supplier, one route, or one technology. Diversification does not require abandoning international trade or attempting to produce everything domestically. Complete energy independence may be impossible or unnecessarily expensive for many countries. It means ensuring that no single disruption can paralyze the entire economy. A diversified system might combine domestic generation, multiple import routes, strategic reserves, cross-border connections, renewable power, nuclear energy, where politically and technically viable, storage and flexible demand. It also requires stronger grids. Building more electricity generation means little if the transmission network cannot deliver it. Electrifying vehicles, heating, industry and data centers increases the importance of the grid and increases the consequences if it fails. This is why energy resilience is not simply a matter of producing more electricity. It requires transformers, substations, cables, backup systems, skilled technicians, physical security and cyber protection. Many of these investments are invisible. There is no dramatic ceremony when an old transformer is replaced before it breaks. Voters rarely celebrate redundant transmission capacity. A backup control center does not produce revenue while the primary center is working. But during a crisis, the least glamorous investment may become the most valuable asset in the country. The same principle applies to supply chains. After COVID-19, reshoring became a popular answer to international vulnerability. Governments began asking whether strategically important goods should be produced at home. In certain sectors, domestic capability is essential. Countries may decide that they require secure access to medicines, defense equipment, energy infrastructure, telecommunications technology, or advanced semiconductors, even if domestic production costs more. But attempting to manufacture everything nationally would create new weaknesses. It could increase prices, reduce competition, and isolate businesses from innovation. Resilience is not economic isolation. It is intelligent redundancy. A company dependent on one supplier may add a second supplier in another region. A government may maintain emergency stocks of critical goods. Allied countries may divide production so that no single facility becomes indispensable. Manufacturers may design products that can accept alternative components. This requires companies to understand their suppliers beyond the first tier. A business may believe it has diversified because it purchases from 3 separate firms. But if all 3 depend on the same processor, port, or source of raw material, the diversification exists only on paper. True resilience begins by identifying hidden concentrations. That is expensive. Holding inventory ties up capital. Maintaining spare capacity reduces short-term efficiency. Qualifying alternative suppliers requires time and money. Building a factory in a higher-cost country may reduce profits. Yet the correct comparison is not between resilience and a perfectly functioning market. It is between the cost of resilience and the cost of prolonged failure. A bridge appears expensive until the only alternative route is destroyed. A strategic reserve seems unnecessary until imports stop. A second communication system looks wasteful until the first one goes dark. The financial system requires the same discipline. Fiscal resilience does not mean governments should never borrow. During war, recession, pandemic, or natural disaster, public borrowing can protect society from even greater damage. But borrowing capacity is most valuable when it has not already been exhausted. A government entering a crisis with credible finances can support households, stabilize companies, and rebuild infrastructure. A government already struggling to pay interest may be forced to reduce spending when citizens need help most. Fiscal discipline is therefore not merely an argument about balanced budgets. It is a form of national preparedness. Governments must decide which spending strengthens the country's ability to survive future shocks and which spending merely postpones political discomfort. This is difficult because the benefits of resilience often arrive after the politicians who financed it have left office. The cost is immediate. The success may consist of something that never happens. No blackout, no bank run, no shortage, no institutional collapse. Prevention is politically difficult because there are no images of the disaster that was avoided. Churchill faced this problem during the 1930s. His importance did not lie in possessing perfect knowledge of the future. He could not know the timing, sequence, or outcome of the war that was approaching. His strength was recognizing that uncertainty was not an excuse for passivity. Preparation had to begin before every argument was settled. Factories required time to expand. Pilots required time to train. Alliances required time to form. Public opinion required time to understand the danger. Certainty, when it finally arrived, would arrive too late. That lesson applies directly to cybersecurity. A nation cannot begin training specialists after its essential networks are compromised. It cannot design backup communications while the primary system is already failing. It cannot decide who controls the emergency response after an attack has begun. Cyber resilience must be practiced. Organizations need protected backups that cannot be destroyed by the same attack. Critical systems need the ability to operate manually when digital control is unavailable. Governments and businesses must define who makes decisions, how information is shared, and what services receive priority. Exercises should include failure, not the reassuring version in which every organization responds as planned, but the difficult version in which communications break, information is incomplete, and several emergencies occur simultaneously. A hospital may lose access to data while the electricity grid is unstable. A port may face a cyberattack while military tension is already disrupting shipping. A bank may suffer a technical outage while fabricated messages claim that customer deposits are unsafe. The value of preparation lies in discovering weaknesses before an adversary or disaster discovers them first. But technical preparation cannot succeed without trusted institutions. Trust is often treated as something soft, separate from national power. In reality, it is critical infrastructure. During an emergency, governments need citizens to follow instructions. Banks need depositors to believe their money is safe. Health authorities need communities to accept guidance. Allies need one another to honour commitments. Businesses need confidence that contracts and laws will remain in force. A government may possess accurate information, but if citizens no longer believe it, that information loses much of its power. Trust cannot be manufactured during the crisis. It is accumulated slowly through competence, honesty, and fair treatment. Leaders do not preserve confidence by pretending that every situation is under control. Reassurance that is quickly proven false can be more damaging than an honest admission of uncertainty. Credible institutions explain what is known, what remains unknown, and what is being done to learn more. They correct errors. They avoid turning every emergency into partisan theatre. Public confidence does not require universal agreement. It requires enough shared reality for collective action to remain possible. This is why social cohesion belongs in national security planning. A divided society may possess wealth, technology, and military power while remaining vulnerable to manipulation. Foreign adversaries do not always need to invent new grievances. They can amplify existing ones. If every hardship is immediately interpreted as proof of betrayal by another political, ethnic, or economic group, crisis management becomes a struggle between citizens rather than a response to the crisis itself. Social cohesion does not mean suppressing disagreement. Democracy depends on disagreement. It means preserving the belief that political opponents remain members of the same society, that institutions can still settle disputes, and that losing one election does not justify destroying the system. This form of resilience begins long before adulthood. Education must prepare citizens not only for employment, but for a world in which information can be manufactured at industrial scale. The ability to verify a source, recognize manipulation, and distinguish evidence from emotional certainty is becoming as important as traditional literacy. At the same time, education systems must adapt to technological change. AI will alter jobs unevenly. Some workers will need advanced technical skills. Others will need to perform tasks that combine human judgment, communication, and technology. Many will need opportunities to retrain repeatedly rather than receiving one education at the beginning of adult life. A society that benefits from AI but abandons those displaced by it may gain productivity while losing stability. Resilience, therefore, requires that innovation and adaptation advance together. Governments cannot guarantee that every job will remain unchanged. Nor should they attempt to freeze the economy in its present form, but they can make transitions less destructive. Training can be connected to real employment rather than vague promises. Benefits can support workers while they move between occupations. Schools and companies can collaborate before skill shortages become severe. Regions dependent on declining industries can receive infrastructure and investment before social decline becomes entrenched. This is not charity. It is maintenance of the human system on which technological progress depends. Demographic aging demands the same honesty. Pension reform cannot be delayed indefinitely without transferring greater pressure to younger generations. But reform imposed without fairness can destroy public support. Different kinds of work place different demands on the body. People approaching retirement have less time to adjust than those at the beginning of their careers. Lower-income workers may depend almost entirely on public pensions. A resilient system changes gradually, communicates clearly, and protects the most vulnerable while preserving financial sustainability. Migration policy must also connect economic need with practical capacity. A country may require additional workers, but successful migration depends on housing, schools, language education, employment, and integration. If governments increase population without expanding services, both migrants and existing communities may pay the price. Competition for scarce housing or overloaded public services can then be exploited politically. The problem is not solved by pretending that integration has no cost. It is solved by investing in the conditions that make integration work. Alliances provide another form of resilience. No country can efficiently maintain complete independence in energy, technology, finance, defense, and manufacturing. Even the most powerful nations depend on partners. A resilient alliance is not simply a promise of military assistance. It is a network of compatible infrastructure, shared intelligence, coordinated industrial capacity, and political trust. Allies can diversify one another's risks. One may possess energy resources. Another may lead in advanced manufacturing. A third may provide logistics, research, or strategic geography. But alliances must be maintained during peace. If partners believe commitments are temporary or purely transactional, they will create separate arrangements. Duplication will rise. Intelligence sharing may decline. Rivals may test the divisions. The strength of an alliance is not measured only by what it says in public. It is measured by what its members are prepared to do when cooperation becomes expensive. Businesses also have responsibilities. Corporate resilience cannot be reduced to an emergency document stored on a server that may become inaccessible during an attack. Companies need to know which operations are essential, how long they can function without external services, and where their hidden dependencies lie. Boards should understand cyber risk, energy exposure, and supply chain concentration as strategic issues, not technical matters delegated entirely to specialists. Short-term efficiency cannot remain the only measure of success. A company that produces excellent quarterly results but cannot survive 2 weeks without one foreign component is not truly efficient. It has simply transferred risk from the balance sheet into the future. Communities matter because national systems often depend on local action during the first hours of a crisis. Emergency services may be overwhelmed. Communications may become unreliable. Central authorities may lack accurate information. Local governments, hospitals, schools, volunteer organizations, and neighborhood networks can identify vulnerable residents, distribute supplies, and communicate trusted information. Social relationships become operational capacity. People who know one another are better able to recognize who needs medicine, transport, or assistance. Communities with credible local leaders are less dependent on anonymous messages circulating online. The family also has a role. But preparation should not become paranoia. Resilience does not require building a bunker or expecting civilization to collapse. It means reducing avoidable fragility. A household with some emergency savings has more time to respond to unemployment or inflation. A family that keeps essential medication, basic supplies, and copies of important records can manage a temporary disruption more safely. People who understand their insurance, debt, and digital security are less vulnerable to a shock or fraud. Investors can apply the same principle. Concentration may produce exceptional returns during stability, but it can also magnify losses when conditions change. Diversification does not eliminate risk. It prevents one prediction from determining the entire future. The principle is the same at every scale. Do not depend on one supplier, one technology, one source of energy, one market, one institution, or one assumption about how the future will unfold. Resilience is not fear of the future. It is respect for uncertainty. Churchill's greatest strategic strength was not the ability to predict every event correctly. It was the willingness to prepare before certainty existed. He understood that courage was not a substitute for ships, factories, intelligence, alliances, or public endurance. Speeches could strengthen morale, but morale had to be supported by material preparation. The modern world needs the same combination. Technology without trusted institutions is fragile. Military strength without economic capacity is temporary. Wealth without social cohesion can disappear into conflict. Efficiency without redundancy survives only while nothing unexpected occurs. And leadership without preparation becomes performance. Civilizations rarely disappear because of one disaster. More often, they weaken when many manageable problems are allowed to become one unmanageable system. A government postpones maintenance. A company removes every reserve. A society allows mistrust to deepen. An alliance permits doubt to spread. A pension promise grows without financing. A grid expands without protection. A technology advances faster than people can adapt. For years, each problem appears survivable. Then a shock connects them. The challenge of the 21st century is not simply deciding which crisis deserves attention first. It is understanding how each crisis changes the conditions in which the next one will arrive. The strongest societies will not be those that escape every recession, attack, war, epidemic, or natural disaster. No country can purchase immunity from history. They will be the societies capable of absorbing shocks without losing their institutions, their productive capacity, their alliances, or their confidence in one another. This requires money. It requires competence. It requires sacrifice before danger becomes visible. Above all, it requires leaders willing to invest in outcomes for which they may never receive credit. The next global shock may begin with a war, a market panic, a cyberattack, a failed harvest, an energy shortage, or an event no strategic plan has yet imagined. But the decisive question will not be where it begins. It will be whether the system can prevent the first failure from becoming the second, the third, and the fourth. The future may not belong to the nation with the largest economy, nor to the nation with the most advanced weapon. It may belong to the society that can be struck without being shattered, the society that can adapt without abandoning its principles. The society that can suffer disruption without surrendering to panic. In an age when everything is connected, resilience is no longer one national priority among many. It is the foundation beneath them all.